A Lion Air airplane travelling from Jakarta in Indonesia to the city of Pangkal Pinang has crashed with 189 people on board. It lost contact 13 minutes after takeoff. Well, in the studio with me is Alistair Sanford to talk a little bit more about that. Good morning, Alistair.
Good morning, Belle.
What more do we know at this stage?
Yes, well, it seems this plane has crashed. There's a major search and rescue operation ongoing in the Java Sea, and it seems they've located the scene of the crash. The disaster agency in Indonesia says they've been finding pieces of wreckage. Lion Air flight JT610 was a Boeing jet. It took off from Jakarta on Monday morning, about 6:20 local time, heading for Pangkal Pinang, which is the main city on the island of Bangka. It's just a few hundred kilometres north of Java, and this was a standard commuter flight, basically. 189 people on board, 181 passengers and 8 crew. Most of those on board were adults, but there were some children. The information we're getting from the transport authorities, from search and rescue, and from the flight tracking service Flight Radar 24 suggests that the plane climbed to a height of about 1,500 metres before it vanished from the radar just 13 minutes after takeoff, about 15 kilometres north of the coastline, we think. Navigation authorities say the plane had requested to return to base just before losing contact, but then it's thought no distress signal was given. There is preliminary data showing that the flight perhaps lost a bit of height before regaining height and then falling into the sea. It's crashed into water some 30 or 40 metres deep. Search and rescue vessels are on the scene. There's a helicopter as well. They've been finding items like phones and life vests in the water, and the authorities say now that divers are trying to dive down to the wreck.
And any idea of what caused it yet?
Well, it's very early, of course. The Safety Transport Committee says the cause isn't known, and of course often in these cases there are several factors. We'll have to wait, of course, till the recovery of the black boxes and other data recorders. The weather conditions are said to be okay. The air tracking service says that the plane in question was a Boeing 737 MAX 8. Now, that's a very new plane. The first were only introduced into service last year. Lion Air has only had this plane since August. They say that it was airworthy. Boeing are monitoring the situation. As far as Indonesia and Lion Air's safety record generally, well, it has been patchy in the past. Lion Air is a privately owned budget airline, about 20 years old. It's had one fatal accident in 2004 when a plane crash landed and 25 passengers were killed. They've had several other jets involved in crashes, and there was a crash landing off Bali 5 years ago when everyone survived. Since then, its record has been improving, and it was removed from the EU's air safety blacklist 2 years ago, and Indonesia itself, including Lion Air, had their safety ranking upgraded just this year. So it's improving, but it has had a pretty patchy record in the past.
All right, thank you very much, Alistair. Let's go now live to Sao Paulo in Brazil, where journalist Sam Cowie is. Good morning to you, Sam. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. Just tell us, we've seen images of division in the streets in Brazil. What reaction have you been seeing to this election win?
Yeah, well, I mean, Brazil is completely polarised right now, and it has been for a while, pretty much since the last elections in 2014. But as this year's elections have approached, the divide has grown ever deeper, basically. Tonight, after Mr. Bolsonaro's victory, you saw hundreds of supporters on Avenida Paulista, the main thoroughfare of the city. Music being played, drinks being enjoyed, a very party carnival atmosphere. But then, of course, you saw at the Workers' Party headquarters with Fernando Haddad in the video that we saw, a very sombre mood. People are very worried. Some people, at least, his opponents are very worried about the state of democracy in Brazil, how things will go. Of course, you know, as we've seen already, Mr. Bolsonaro is a man that has a history of some quite extremist rhetoric, you know, disparaging comments about, you know, LGBT people, women and minorities in Brazil. And, you know, he's also an avid supporter of Brazil's military dictatorship. He's, you know, praised torture in the past, called for extrajudicial police killings. You know, and so all of this right now, people are very worried about whether this rhetoric that he's had for the last 28 years in Congress, whether he's going to, you know, put this into practice, and whether the checks and balances and democratic institutions of Brazil are going to be able to push back against perhaps the worst excesses of his potential, of his government, and how he would potentially rule.
Well, that's the interesting point, isn't it? I mean, what does all that mean? What does Bolsonaro's views mean for Brazil's future, both domestically and on the international stage?
Well, domestically, Bolsonaro has basically won a platform mainly on anti-corruption and public security. Brazil is a country, a very violent country, that last year there was a record number of nearly 64,000 homicides. People are scared, people are worried, and Mr. Bolsonaro has presented a kind of very hard-line law and order stance. He will, as he says, he has pledged basically to give carte blanche to police officers, to give greater rights for them to kill suspects. Of course, this resonates often with voters, especially sometimes lower income voters who live in rough neighborhoods. But also we know, and if we look at other similar kind of pledges by other presidents across the world, like in Mexico, for example, we know that this often correlates to and often ends up in collateral damage of, marginalized populations. And so the idea that he will give carte blanche to officers, police officers, to kill suspects, basically. Human rights experts are extremely worried about this, including Amnesty International. They've just put out a statement today. On the international scene, we can expect Mr. Bolsonaro to probably get closer and, try to get even closer to Donald Trump in the United States. He received a phone call from Trump today. He's a big fan of Donald Trump. He calls Trump his dear. So that's what we can expect on the international stage, a closer relationship probably with the United States.
All right, thank you very much, Sam Cowie in Sao Paulo. Jessica Saltz joins us now live from the Bundestag. Good morning, Jessica. A bad result for the CDU and for the SPD, but can Germany's coalition or grand coalition come back from this?
Well, it's certainly a very worrying sign, Bella. We're seeing Germany's governing parties, the Conservatives and Social Democrats, really fall out of favour across the country. And the Conservatives have now seen severe loss in support in two of their strongholds in a row in elections in Bavaria and now Hesse. And this is a really worrying sign for Angela Merkel. And the CDU leader in Hesse, Volker Bouffier, wasted no time yesterday evening after the results were in pointing the finger of blame quite squarely at the government in Berlin. He said that this was a sign that voters were getting fed up with the government in Berlin arguing rather than actually concentrating on political issues. Now, Bouffier is considered a very strong ally of Angela Merkel, and he's now been quite critical of her. Very worrying for Merkel at a time when she's consistently losing the backing of her own party, and she needs her own party to support her in order to be re-elected a leader of the CDU at a party conference in December. It is thought that if she is not re-elected head of the CDU in December, then her days as Chancellor could really be numbered. Of course, the Social Democrats also in government in Berlin. This is a party in existential crisis. Their leader, Andrea Nahles, last night saying things cannot go on as they are. They will now need to decide whether or not they file for divorce, so to speak, in the coalition government and decide to pull out of the government altogether.
And Jessica, we saw huge gains for the Greens, not only in Hesse last night, but also in Bavaria previously. Is that anything more than a protest vote?
Well, yes, just as the centrist parties in Germany are falling out of favour, the Greens are on an astronomic rise, and this was a party that was once a peripheral, bohemian green movement that's very much becoming now part of the political establishment, and many think could become one of the big people's parties in Germany because of its recent success. Now, part of its recent success is partly protest voting. I've met many new Green voters who said they just couldn't face voting for Conservatives or Social Democrats and want to place their vote with the Green Party, which at least stands for something positive. But I think also environmental issues are very much becoming very important in Germany at the moment. The German government recently very heavily criticised for what was considered its poor handling of the diesel scandal, prioritising jobs in the auto industry rather than punishing the auto industry for cheating emissions tests. And also we've seen a scorching hot long summer in Germany, which is very unusual here and has cost the environment and farming communities billions of euros. And I think Germans are really beginning to realise that climate change and environmental issues are really very close to home, and this is another reason that they are choosing to vote for the Green Party.
All right, thank you very much, Jessica, for bringing us up to date there. Jessica Saltz in Berlin.